Elsa Schiaparelli appeared in Vogue as a fashion designer in November 1927, and for more than 10 years, she dominated the pages of the magazine alongside her rival, Gabrielle Coco Chanel, both as a trendsetter and a creator. Schiaparelli was born with an innate talent for surprising, wrote Bettina Ballard, former editor of the fashion section of Vogue in 1960, in her memoir, In My Fashion. Like her mentor, the French couturier Paul Poiret, Schiaparelli collaborated with leading artists, illustrators, and photographers of her time, such as Cecil Beaton and Christian Berard. But even closer, she was connected with iconic figures of Surrealism, including Jean Cocteau, Eduardo Benito, and Salvador Dalí. All these creative individuals worked for Vogue, filling its pages with surrealistic images, thus making the magazine a co-conspirator in Schiaparelli's creative vision. Along with the graphic works of master photographers such as Edward Steichen, George Hoyningen-Huene, Gounod, Cecil Beaton, and Horst P. Horst, who photographed Schiaparelli and her designs for Vogue hundreds of times, the drawings of outstanding artists turned the magazine into a vibrant biographical document, introducing us to this unique fashion artist. But Schiaparelli's creations were not limited to the ideas of Surrealism. From amusing sportswear, she moved to silhouettes that emphasized the figure. Schiaparelli returned the waist and shoulders to women, made an erotic emphasis on the bust line, and played with daring symbolism. Her work with fabrics, jewelry, accessories, and her introduction of shocking pink to the fashion world gave her models a modern sound. She was also fascinated by Eastern philosophy, the mystical echoes of which gave her designs an elevated quality, pulling them out of the purely commercial sphere, though she also proved that she had a strong commercial sense. The inspiration for Yves Saint Laurent, Paul Gaultier, Steven Johnson, and no less rebellious Alexander McQueen, Schiaparelli considered herself, above all, an artist. Her reckless boldness and brilliance allowed her to lead women in fashion rather than simply following their tastes. Her name still resonates today, that of a unique artist whose creations dominated the turbulent 1930s, whose rivalry with the equally adventurous Chanel still captivates and fascinates us, and whose pioneering spirit continues to inspire. Elsa Louise Maria Schiaparelli was born on September 10, 1890, in Rome. From the description in her book Shocking Life, we get a portrait of an impressionable and energetic girl, deeply insecure about the merits of her appearance. Elsa's family belonged to the upper middle class, but more importantly, they were enlightened and well-educated. Her mother, Maria Luisa, was from Malta, and Italian blood mingled with Scottish and Gypsy heritage. Her mother would constantly remind her younger daughter that she could hardly consider herself a beauty. Elsa's father, Celestino, was an Orientalist, the dean of the National Library of Dei Lince, holding an immense amount of literary, scientific, and historical treasures, and located in the Palazzo Corsini, the building where Elsa was born. Her uncle Giovanni was a renowned astronomer. Her cousin Ernesto was an Egyptologist who made important discoveries in the Valley of the Kings. Elsa's aunt, a dazzling woman, traveled extensively and gave her relatives marvelous exotic trinkets from all over the world. All of these relatives influenced Elsa, sparking her interest in antiquities, the new in science, and the pagan world of the East. As a child, just as in her adult years, life according to a set plan seemed uninteresting to her. What occupied and fascinated her at that time was beauty. She loved the brightly pink flowers of begonias, whose branches hung over her crib. She would stick the flowers and seeds into her ears, mouth, and nostrils, and her face would transform into a sort of flower bed. She was thrilled by her mother's outfits and her wedding dress, which had been stored in the attic trunk from the 1870s to the 1880s. She was especially stirred by the corsets and dresses that transformed the female body. The theme of masquerades, mysterious ambiguities, and dual meanings, so important in her best works, clearly had its roots in these early Roman impressions. Schiaparelli recalled how impressed she was when she met the Marquise Luisa Casati. This socialite led one of her cheetahs on a leash, adorned with diamonds, a living work of art, a fantastic embodiment of an age of luxury. But the inspiring figure of Casati was not just a fantastic figure. Fully aware of the overwhelming impression her image made, she communicated with artists and patronized them, which surely influenced Schiaparelli, whose boutique would later become a favorite spot for artists and designers. In her youth, Schiaparelli and a friend sneaked into philosophy lectures and listened to Filippo Marinetti, the author of the Futurist Manifesto, presenting his theories at the University of Rome. She drew, painted, and wrote poetry, publishing a small collection of poems titled Arethusa in 1911. She liked to play the coquette and amuse herself by getting her admirers to dress in rose-lavender shades of sorrow. Undoubtedly, she experienced bouts of boredom and depression, which she was prone to throughout her life, and in 1913, when an unwanted admirer became overly persistent, she went to England to work as a nanny. Stopping in Paris along the way, she fell in love with the city. That year, in Paris, Nijinsky danced in a play wearing a costume made from the designs of the Avant-Garde Leo Bagst. The sensitive heart of the young girl responded vividly to the resonant mood of the performance. She went to a ball where she danced the tango for the first time, dressed in bright, contrasting blue and orange colors, à la Bagst. Enchanted by this dazzling display of Parisian life, the reclusive yet passionate girl truly experienced joy and excitement for the first time, promising herself that she would return to the city. In London, Schiaparelli attended lectures, visited galleries, and just before the war in August 1914, she listened to the musings of the young Polish theosophist Count Wilhelm Wenda de Kerlora. Blonde, handsome, he spoke of spiritualism, the power of the soul over the body, magic, and eternal youth. Schiaparelli, a naive possessor of a large dowry, was charmed by the young man. They talked about the soul all night, and by morning, they were engaged. The wedding took place at the town hall, but the memory of that day was marred for the bride by a demonstration of suffragists whom she described as mad, manly furies, all as ugly as one another. Despite this, Schiaparelli always emphasized that she was not a feminist. When the war with Germany was declared, the newlyweds hurriedly fled and took refuge in her husband's family home in the south of France, in Nice. It's easy to guess that the marriage didn't last. "I didn't know what to do or how to be, for my husband, like a cloud, floated in the heavens," Schiaparelli wrote. Her husband was fickle, and she, loving, wasn't averse to living off her wife's fortune. Decker-Lore considered America to be a more promising place for himself, and since the money was not yet fully spent, on April 20th, 1916, Chita sailed to New York. By chance, on the same ship was Gabrielle Picabia, wife of the Dadaist artist Francis Picabia, whose friendship had a deep influence on Schiaparelli's life and work. Chita settled in the Francophile Hotel Brevard in Bohemian Greenwich Village, a haven for avant-garde artists, including Picabia and his fellow Dadaists Marcel Duchamp, Cubist Albert Glass, photographer Man Ray, who photographed Schiaparelli's first models in 1920, and Edward Steichen. She would later work with both of them for Vogue. The vibrant modernity of New York urged expatriate artists to abandon the formal style of European clothing and to wear tweed jackets of a sporty style, bright Chicago ties, and bowlers. The city infused their old-fashioned ideas with new energy. The geometric outlines of Manhattan's skyscrapers, neon lights, squares, and rectangles in the layout resembled cubism. The machinery of the modern world, according to Picabia, served as the inspiration for the new aesthetic. Not being a conformist, Schiaparelli decorated her home with antique furniture and items of ancient art. Cubism, geometry, and the dynamism of New York manifested in her later works, and upon her return to Paris, in her commercially successful collection of sportswear. The young couple lived a nomadic life. Countess Deckerlohr, by virtue of her marriage to Schiaparelli, tried several jobs, served as a ticker tape attendant at a stockbroker's office on Wall Street, worked as a saleswoman at Nicole Gould, the sister of Paul Poiret. This was a world far removed from the world of Vogue, a magazine that would later become her anchor and support, with its target audience of socialites and career women, where employees wore hats and gloves. In 1920, Schiaparelli gave birth to a daughter, Maria, nicknamed Gogo, and soon Deckerlohr left her. Few people, she wrote later, have experienced such humiliation. Her financial situation significantly worsened due to her husband's frauds, and she worked tirelessly to alleviate the pressures of poverty and depression. Gabrielle Picabia and her friend Blanche Hayes helped her. In 1922, Hayes paid for Schiaparelli's trip to Paris, along with Gogo. In Paris, Schiaparelli settled with Gabrielle Picabia and began sketching and making clothes for her hostess, while also working as a guide for wealthy Americans. One day, she had the opportunity to accompany one of her American friends, Hayes, to Paul Poiret's atelier. She first entered the world of haute couture, and there met the person she considered to be the greatest artist of her time, and whom she later referred to as the Leonardo of fashion. For fun, Schiaparelli tried on a wide, loose black velvet coat decorated with bright stripes on a blue capeskin lining. The coat was, in her words, magnificent. "You can wear anything, anywhere," said Poiret, and gave her the coat as a gift. In 1913, Vogue called Paul Poiret the harbinger of simplicity, always original and always delightful. He was the first among fashion designers to collaborate with artists, but by 1920, his star was already fading. The ornate luxury of his designs belonged to an era when women had not yet taken on men's work nor gained the right to vote. But the jazz age had begun, with its cocktails, fast cars, nightclubs, and endless parties that so captivated the golden youth. In 1921, Vogue melancholically remarked, "You inevitably begin to long for girls who are less independent, less energetic, but more feminine than the mass type of 20th century girl." What did Poiret see in Schiaparelli? Without a doubt, a bright individualist, a woman of unique style. Soon, they became friends, and she began to promote his clothing. The fragile, short-haired Schiaparelli liked how clothing transformed women, turning a plain duckling into a swan. "No one knew how I would appear. Sometimes I was ahead of fashion. Sometimes I looked just like my plain sister." She was a good artist and painted in oils, so she began creating her own sketches, and for her, it was just a matter of time. She sold these sketches to other fashion houses. Maggie Roof even told her she would be better off growing potatoes, including at the Lamball Fashion House. By the end of 1925, her friend Blanche Hayes bought the company and took Schiaparelli in as a designer. By 1926, she was confident enough in her abilities to start her own business. In May 1926, Vogue, reflecting on the mystery of color schemes in clothing, wrote, "A monochrome wardrobe is deathly dull. A three-color one is festive, but a two-color one is the most economical. The best color combinations are brown with beige and black with white. Black is again in fashion. It's the most current color for the evening." Schiaparelli naturally used both combinations in her first collection. The #1 display was created in January 1927 at Schiaparelli's apartment on University Street, 20. The Parisian Vogue presented 3 main models from the collection in its February issue, photographed by Goiningen Gune, and titled simply as 3 fashion sweaters. These photos showcase the sweaters from the front and back. The pattern on 2 of the models reflected the influence of constructivism, with its cubes, straight lines, rectangles, and angles. The pattern on the 3rd model, a scatter of black dots on a beige background, was markedly different, as Vogue noted, from the popular stripes of the time. However, Schiaparelli sought radical differences from her competitors, aiming to influence and change fashion. For inspiration, she turned to her circle, the contradictory brothers of the innovators, the Surrealists. But we'll discuss that next time.